Imagine the scenario. It is a completely normal Friday. People are heading home from work, and suddenly the news networks start reporting on this mysterious new virus.
Right, just a few scattered cases at first.
Yeah, exactly. It starts small in some remote town, but by Monday, the death toll is in the thousands. By Wednesday, borders are slamming shut, airports are deserted, and global economies are absolutely collapsing. And the really terrifying part is that this pathogen is 100% lethal.
Wow, so no one survives it.
No one. It sweeps the globe, and humanity is put on this rapid, terrifying countdown clock.
It's basically the ultimate nightmare scenario, right? A total systemic failure driven by something entirely invisible that just dismantles society from the inside out in a matter of days.
Exactly. So scientists go to work in an absolute frantic panic, and against all odds, they actually decipher the code of the virus. They find a cure.
Okay, but there's a catch, I'm guessing.
Oh, there is a massive catch. The cure requires pure, entirely uninfected blood, like blood from someone who has never been exposed to the virus or anything else, ever.
Which, I mean, in a global pandemic, that immediately rules out every single adult on the planet. Everyone's been exposed. Everyone is carrying at least the trace elements of the pathogen.
Right. Every single adult is disqualified. But they finally find exactly one match, a single innocent child.
Oh, man.
Yeah, to manufacture the global antidote to actually save the entire human race, the father of this child has to sign a document authorizing the draining of his son's blood. He has to do it knowing with absolute certainty that his boy will die in the process.
That is just a completely unbearable psychological weight.
It really is.
It's a kind of moral dilemma that leaves you entirely speechless,
Yeah.
where the math of saving billions demands this intimately devastating personal cost.
Exactly. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for anyone listening. I am not pitching you a script for the next big Hollywood blockbuster. What I just described to you is the literal opening narrative of the source material you sent us to dive into today.
Yeah, it's quite the hook.
It's from a deeply layered, thoroughly fascinating theological sermon titled The Blood That Saves, From the Paschal Lamb to the Cross.
Right, and just to give you some context on the sources for this deep dive, this document was authored by Pastor Heiko Obermüller, and it was delivered as a summary for an Easter service in 2026 down in Ilhabela, Brazil.
And since you sent us a religious text, let's just lay down the ground rules for this deep dive right away. We are not here to take sides.
Definitely not.
We aren't here to validate specific religious dogmas, and we are not endorsing a particular theological worldview, left-wing, right-wing, or otherwise.
We are just looking at the text.
Exactly. Our mission is to objectively dissect the architecture of this argument. How does a communicator build a bridge between an ancient event in 1500 BC and modern, visceral pandemic anxieties just to explain the core tenets of the Christian faith?
And honestly, whether you are a deeply religious person, a complete skeptic, or just a lover of narrative structure, unpacking how ancient concepts are translated into modern emotional triggers is an absolute masterclass in rhetoric.
It really is.
It's all about storytelling and how a communicator deconstructs a cultural autopilot concept to force an audience to actually feel the weight of an idea.
So the immediate question that jumped out at me from your notes was, why a virus? Like, why use a biothriller concept complete with laboratories, uninfected blood, and global panic to explain a 2,000-year-old religion?
It's a brilliant structural choice, I think, because it strips away all the abstraction of ancient religious terminology.
Right, and makes it real.
Exactly. The author bases his central premise on a specific text, Romans 5.12. And the document argues that what we traditionally call original sin isn't merely a behavioral mistake. It's not a moral trip-up or a temporary character flaw you can just apologize for.
So it's not just doing something bad.
Right. The sermon frames it as a literal genetic mutation in the human spirit.
It's treated like a computer virus inserted into a software's source code.
That is a great way to put it. And that structural flaw means every single subsequent copy of that software generated from the source is born already infected. So the author is arguing that humanity doesn't just learn to be flawed through bad environments or poor parenting. It is born with a systemic, fatal condition that inevitably leads to spiritual death.
Okay, let me push back on that a little bit, because I think a lot of people listening might feel a bit of whiplash here. Wait, so this text is essentially saying that all human agency, all our philosophies, our charities, our good deeds, they are essentially useless against this.
Well, according to this framework, yeah.
Because if sin is a terminal virus, Trying to cure it with good behavior feels like giving Advil to someone with a lethal infection. I mean, the Advil might relieve the symptoms for an hour, it might make sitting in the quarantine room feel a little nicer, but the virus is still actively destroying your organs.
That's exactly it. Within the ecosystem of this theological argument, that is the inescapable reality. You cannot cure a disease using blood that is already infected by the disease.
It's mathematically impossible.
Right. You can manage the symptoms, you can build a more polite society, you can write beautiful ethical frameworks, but the pathogen remains completely untouched. Therefore, a systemic global pandemic requires a completely external, 100% pure antidote.
Something entirely outside the corrupted system.
Exactly.
So to explain where this concept of a pure antidote actually originates, the text grabs us and jumps back 3.5 millennia straight into the dust of ancient Egypt.
Right, around 1500 BC. The Israelites are enslaved, but the text makes a really crucial distinction here. Pharaoh isn't just framed as a historical political tyrant demanding free labor.
He's more than that.
Yeah, the sermon positions him as the grand architect of spiritual captivity. He is essentially the warden of the quarantine zone.
Oh, that's a wild way to think about it.
And after 9 devastating plagues that systematically dismantle the Egyptian infrastructure, we arrive at the ultimate ultimatum, which is the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn.
And this is where the mechanics of the very first Passover are laid out, or Pesach, which literally translates to Passover. The text highlights how surgically precise the instructions were.
They were incredibly specific.
Yeah, it wasn't a vague directive to just sacrifice an animal and hope for the best. A flawless 1-year-old male lamb had to be sacrificed. And then the blood of that lamb had to be applied to the outside of the doorposts of the home.
And that placement, the blood on the outside, is paramount to the author's argument. It establishes the foundational mechanics of how this rescue operation actually worked.
How so?
Well, it had to be a visible, public declaration of reliance on a substitute.
It's incredibly counterintuitive to how we usually think about morality today. While reading through your sources, my brain immediately went to a modern analogy. The angel of death in this story is functioning remarkably like a digital security system.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Think about it. When a digital security system scans a network, it doesn't do a moral audit of the person sitting at the keyboard. It doesn't care if you volunteer at an animal shelter on weekends or if you relentlessly yell at your coworkers.
Right, the system doesn't care about your personality.
Exactly. It simply scans the server for the correct cryptographic key. If the key's there, you're safe. If it isn't, you're not. In Egypt, the blood on the doorpost was the cryptographic key.
That's a fascinating way to frame it. It completely bypasses human behavior and focuses solely on the authentication protocol.
But think about how profoundly offensive that is to the modern ego. We live in a world obsessed with meritocracy. We desperately want to believe our resumes save us.
Earn it.
Right. But under this Passover system, you could have a grumpy, deeply flawed person sitting inside a house with blood on the door, and they survive. Meanwhile, you could have a wonderfully charitable, philosophically brilliant person in the house next door, but without the blood, they die. That feels deeply unfair to our modern sensibilities.
And the author leans directly into that discomfort. That friction is the entire point. If we go back to the virus metaphor, because every single person is already infected, there is no such thing as a good patient or a bad patient.
Right. There are only infected patients.
Exactly. Survival in this narrative wasn't based on a human resume or moral superiority. It was based entirely on the presence of a substitute who had already paid the ultimate price. The lamb paid the bill, so the house was skipped.
But this entire ancient Egyptian setup is just the author laying the groundwork, right? He uses it as this low-resolution prototype to explain what he considers the high-definition reality, which is the crucifixion of Jesus.
Yes, this is where the document transitions from historical narrative into a highly intricate theological proof. The author highlights the staggering mathematical and historical correlations between the Exodus lamb and Jesus.
To prove it wasn't an accident.
Right, arguing that this was a meticulously designed system, not just retrospective poetry patched together centuries later.
Let's look at those granular parallels because they are mathematically wild. First, the dates. In the Exodus instructions, the lamb had to be separated and inspected on the 10th day of Nisan, which was the first month of their biblical calendar.
Right.
And the author points out that Jesus entered Jerusalem, the event we now call Palm Sunday, to be publicly inspected by the religious authorities on the exact same day, the 10th of Nisan.
And the precision continues straight to the time of death. The original Exodus law dictated that the lambs must be sacrificed on the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan.
Okay.
The Gospel accounts place the crucifixion and death of Jesus at the exact same time, on the very same afternoon of the 14th of Nisan, right as the Passover lambs were being slaughtered in the temple nearby.
That is wild, and it even comes down to the bones. The ancient farm rule in Exodus demanded that absolutely no bones of the Passover lamb could be broken during preparation. Now jump forward to the Roman execution.
Yeah, to understand the mechanics here, we have to look at how crucifixion actually worked. It was essentially death by slow asphyxiation.
Just a brutal way to go.
Incredibly brutal. To draw full breath, the victim had to constantly push up on their nailed feet to relieve the pressure on their chest. Roman soldiers routinely shattered the legs of the condemned palm with a heavy iron club to eliminate their ability to push up, rapidly speeding up suffocation.
But when the soldiers came to Jesus to break his legs, they found him already dead.
Exactly. Fulfilling a hyper-specific, obscure, ancient dietary law in the middle of a brutal Roman execution.
But the text makes sure we don't just view this as some dry mathematical transaction. It brings the emotional weight crashing back down. The author focuses intensely on the moment on the cross when Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
Right, a very famous moment.
The text posits that this wasn't just a physical reaction to the pain of the nails or the suffocation. It was the exact moment the pure child from our opening story absorbed the terminal virus of humanity.
A moment of complete spiritual rupture. The pure source taking on the entire weight of the corruption necessitated a brief but total separation from the divine presence.
Just an unimaginable isolation.
That agony of absolute isolation was the true cost of manufacturing the antidote. It wasn't just physical death. It was the psychological horror of the infection.
To explain the economic shift this caused, the author introduces this brilliant concept of the triplice connexo, or the triple connection of coverage, authority, and redemption. And the way they contrast the Old Testament with the New Testament here is really illuminating.
Yeah, this part is fascinating.
In the Old Testament, sacrificing an animal every year was basically like paying for a monthly streaming subscription.
A recurring subscription model for temporary spiritual protection.
Exactly. You sacrifice a lamb, you get your coverage for a bit. Eventually, the license expires, the gill returns, the protection fades, and you have to go back and pay the premium all over again.
Because the value is temporary.
Right. It's an endless, exhausting loop because the value of an animal is finite. It can't permanently clear the astronomical debt of the human condition.
But the sacrifice of Jesus, according to the document, possessed an infinite divine value. So it completely broke the subscription model.
You don't have to keep paying.
Exactly. It wasn't a monthly rental. It was a lifetime acquisition, paid in full, with zero expiration date.
The author actually uses real estate to explain it, which I loved. Redemption is the literal physical receipt proving that you own the house outright. Because you possess the receipt of redemption, you now have the authority to live in that house, completely protected under its coverage. One doesn't exist without the other.
Which naturally raises an incredibly practical question, and one the author anticipates.
Right, but hold on. If the virus is entirely cured, if the receipt is in hand and the bridge back to the old life has been burned, which the text beautifully symbolizes with the crossing of the Red Sea and the concept of baptism, why is humanity still coughing out in the wasteland?
Yeah, why the delay?
Why don't they just get instantly teleported to paradise? Why endure a grueling, decades-long walk through a harsh desert?
The author navigates this by differentiating between justification and sanctification. The blood of the lamb, the justification, gets the people out of Egypt overnight. It is an immediate, decisive rescue.
Okay, so that gets them out.
Yes, but the desert journey, the sanctification, is required to get Egypt out of the people.
Wow, that is such a profound distinction. The physical chains are gone, but the mental programming of a slave takes a lifetime to overwrite.
Think about the psychological friction here. If you have spent multiple generations living in a system defined by brutal metrics, quotas, and beatings, freedom is actually terrifying. You have no framework for autonomy.
You wouldn't even know what to do with yourself.
Exactly. The desert is the grueling process where that slave mentality goes to die. And learning how to actually be a free person is exhausting work.
To guide that work, the text returns to the original instructions for the Passover meal, translating that ancient menu into highly practical instructions for modern life. This menu breakdown in your notes is really fantastic.
It's very practical.
Yeah. First, they were commanded to eat the lamb. The author says this means you can't just intellectually agree that the story of the sacrifice is nice. You have to internalize it. It has to become part of your cellular makeup. Then there are the bitter herbs.
The bitter herbs.
I love this point. The author notes that true repentance isn't some sweet therapeutic session on a comfortable velvet sofa. Confronting your own failures, looking at the damage you've caused, actually tastes bitter.
It requires an honest, often painful reckoning with your own flaws. It's the sting of realizing your own capacity for harm.
Then you have the unleavened bread, bread without yeast. The author likens the yeast, the ferment, to corruption. Just like we talked about earlier, one bad line of code crashes the entire software.
It spreads quickly.
Right. A tiny pinch of yeast inflates the whole batch of dough. You have to actively remove the elements of corruption from your daily life. But the final instruction is the one that really shakes up the modern religious mindset, and that is eating with your shoes on.
Right. The original text demanded they eat the meal standing up, with their cloaks tucked into their belts, staffs in their hands, and sandals securely on their feet.
They were eating with their bags packed, ready to evacuate at a second's notice. The author uses this to absolutely destroy the modern idea of religion as a comfortable, passive hobby.
It's definitely not that.
It's not a cozy Sunday social club. It's a state of high alert. You are supposed to be constantly ready to leave the old life behind.
Which brings this entire deep dive back to the cinematic narrative we started with. The author brings the theological argument to a brutal, deeply practical climax.
Yeah, the text calls this the soko no estomago, the punch to the gut. Return to that opening story. The father sacrificed his son. The uninfected blood was drained. The world is miraculously cured of the lethal virus.
The ultimate victory.
Yes, and to honor this unimaginable sacrifice, a massive global ceremony is organized. The father walks onto the stage to address the world whose lives were bought with his son's blood. But when he looks out at the auditorium, it's mostly empty.
The seats are completely bare.
People decided they'd rather sleep in. They found the idea of a memorial ceremony a bit boring, so they stayed home to watch a soccer game on TV instead. This devastated, broken father stands at the microphone and screams to an empty room, "My son died for you."
It's a searing indictment. The author synthesizes all the ancient history and theological math to target his ultimate critique, which is modern indifference.
It's chilling.
The sermon posits a chilling theory. A society that has endless hours to scroll through algorithms, endless energy for sports and entertainment, but feels nothing but apathetic boredom toward the astronomical cost of its own spiritual survival, well, that society is suffering from a sickness just as fatal as the original virus.
It's the ultimate tragedy, to be cured of the disease only to die of apathy. The text makes it clear, failing to live a life of active, urgent gratitude is a profound spiritual failure.
If we pull back and look at the journey we've taken through your sources today, it's remarkably cohesive. We move from the visceral dread of a cinematic virus to the rigid mathematical precision of ancient Egyptian security codes, culminating in this incredibly sharp critique of our modern-day apathy toward ultimate sacrifices.
It really is an incredible exercise in critical thinking. To watch a communicator take a holiday that our culture runs on pure autopilot, pastel colors, Easter bunnies, and chocolate, and deconstruct it back into a visceral life-or-death narrative of blood, quarantine, and rescue. It forces you to re-examine the foundation of the story, regardless of your personal worldview.
Knowledge is most valuable when it challenges our assumptions. And this document certainly does that, demanding that we question how comfortable we have become with the narratives of our own rescue.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over, directly inspired by the text itself. The document states, very clearly, that the blood of the lamb was not given so you could build a safe, comfortable bunker inside of Egypt. It wasn't meant to make your captivity more tolerable. It was a passport for immediate departure.
A literal exit visa.
Exactly. So if this framework demands that true salvation requires us to flee our captivity, what is our modern Egypt?
No.
What is the empire that enslaves you today? Is it our extreme comfort? Is it the predictable, numbing routines we refuse to break? Are the screens that anesthetize us serving the exact same function as the soccer game in the story, keeping us away from the reality of our own lives?
It's a heavy question.
It is. The truly terrifying thought raised by this deep dive might be this. What if our modern cage is so beautifully decorated, so perfectly air-conditioned, that we simply refuse to walk out into the desert of true freedom, even though the door is standing wide open and the ransom has already been paid?